Okay, welcome everyone to the Mid-Atlantic Cybersecurity Forum. For those of you who maybe missed or have yet to watch the Mid-Atlantic Healthcare Innovation Summit, which took place on Monday and Tuesday of this week, my name is Matthew Rayner. I'm the publisher here at Healthcare Innovation, and we are so excited for today's virtual program. We have three fantastic sessions scheduled for today, covering the latest trends and topics and strategies and challenges and opportunities when it comes to cybersecurity in healthcare. These sessions are designed to be interactive. Our faculty is ready and waiting for your questions. So if you would like to submit a question at any point during the sessions today, just utilize the chat functionality within the Zoom platform. And we will answer as many of those questions as we possibly can today. One final note before we kick off our opening session today, our cybersecurity forums will be resuming in person next month with our Rocky Mountain Cybersecurity Forum. And then after that, we will be in 6 additional cities between September and December. We do hope we get to see you at one or a few of these in-person cybersecurity forums this year. With that said, I say we go ahead and start our opening session, which is a provider spotlight featuring Penn Medicine. Moderating this session will be our editor-in-chief, Mark Haglund. So I'd love to welcome Mark onto this virtual stage to kick off this session. Mark, take it away.
Thank you so much, Matt. Good morning, everyone. We're so glad to have you with us today. We have 3 sessions that I know you will want to follow fully. Our first session involves a presentation by Seth Foge, Director of Information Security at Penn Medicine, and Thomas Ruiz, Manager of Network Operations at Penn Medicine. So often in healthcare, we're asked, where's the beef? Well, we have beef this morning. A substantive presentation on a really, really interesting case study around segmentation. So I'm going to turn it over to Seth and Thomas. They'll tell you a bit about themselves and what they did that was so innovative at Penn Medicine that we can all learn from. I'm going to turn off my camera and sound while they present, and I'll come back so that we can have questions and answers at the end. So please take it away, gentlemen. Seth and Thomas, welcome.
Thank you. Let me start sharing my screen here. So hopefully everyone can see the presentation at this point. You got it, Mark?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. So welcome to this conversation today. We're excited to talk about this. This is something that's been near and dear to our heart for the last several years, and we'll get into the details here. So starting, my name is Seth. I represent the security side of the house here at Penn Medicine. Most of this conversation is related to from my perspective, the security parts of how secure can we be. And in that, I end up creating a lot of the work that ends up getting handed off to Tom.
And I'm Tom, and I'm the manager of network operations. And my job is to work with my team to figure out, how fast can we go, how quickly can we get everything from A to B, and our team does most of that work. So just a little bit of background on the organization, who we are as Penn Medicine. There's a lot of details that are in here. I'm only going to touch on a few of them. We have about over 50,000 employees. We have 7 main large entities and some additional remote sites, and we manage and maintain over 150,000 endpoints within our organization. So just a little background on our history. This orange region here is around our Philadelphia area. That was the beginning of the organization as a whole. We have our Presbyterian campus, Hub, Rittenhouse, and Pennsylvania Hospital. We have since expanded over the years. We integrated with Chester County Hospital, Lancaster General Health System, and Princeton Health.
So as Tom mentioned in the previous slide, the orange area, this is what it used to represent. And then it's pretty much been a flat network. It's been a flat network for years, and it was a flat network in the 2017 timeframe. But as he also mentioned, there's been a couple of additions more recently that added a little bit of uniqueness to our network. And this really came about and helped highlight the importance and the significance of what segmentation could bring to the table. So 2017, if you all recall, was the year of WannaCry. And WannaCry did hit our organization. And it pretty much spread, as you would expect, through a non-segmented environment, a flat network, pretty much quickly, and we were impacted. But there were 2 points that kind of called out the value of what segmentation could bring to the table. The first was our relationship with Princeton. In that scenario, there was a firewall that was set up between the two main entities, or the entity of Princeton and the rest of the organization. But there was a slight misconfiguration there that it did allow some WannaCry to slip through. However, because there was a firewall there, we could quickly shut down that connection, and we did so, and it stopped that spread, and WannaCry was eventually contained then. Now, on a related note, Lancaster was also connected with a firewall. Now, that firewall had been established a little bit longer. There wasn't a configuration issue, and when WannaCry attempted to spread, it was effectively blocked by the firewall. And we saw hundreds of thousands of attempts as it tried to infect the LGH network. But the firewall did its job, segmentation did its job. So at this point, we had a pretty good understanding of what segmentation could bring to the table. But this is a long story, and things happen a little bit slower in the real world. So the rest of this presentation is on how we really were able to leverage a segmentation strategy to help protect the organization from the risks that are involved. And we're going to talk a little bit more about the risks of what drove us in this decision-making process. We're going to talk about what we did, how we did it, get down some of the details and some of the gotchas as well. So we did have some learning opportunities. Lots of things and challenges popped up along the way that made us have to kind of go back and just strategically understand what we're doing and implement the segmentation solution in a way that made sense for our organization. But ultimately, our goal in this presentation is to enable others for success. We were able to do this, and it took some effort. It took there were some challenges along the way, but we were able to do it, even as an institution as large as Penn Medicine. However, as we go through this, I want to stress the point that we dealt with this from a very much a risk-based perspective. Enabling the business is critical for healthcare. We have to make sure that our patients have the healthcare they need. And a lot of that relies on the infrastructure and the network that we were trying to segment. So there are security risks and there's operational risks, but operational risks in this case kind of trump what we're trying to do with security. So the 2 main points that you're going to see sprinkled throughout the presentation is we don't want to break the business. We don't want to cause things to stop working wherever possible. We put a lot of thought into that. And we don't want to overload the business with a lot of unnecessary procedures, processes, roadblocks, obstacles, that kind of thing. So again, keep that in the back of your mind as we go through this. You may disagree with some of the ways we did things, but this is where we were coming from. So why segment? This is the academic answer. There's lots of benefits to be had in access control and containment and monitoring opportunities. Performance can be increased. There's management benefits that can be had as you can kind of start to control the environment. But for Penn Medicine, the real answers were kind of drilled down to 3 main things. So the first one we talked about in the beginning of the slide is that we saw there were risks associated to lateral movement, whether it be ransomware or malicious actors. In addition to that, we saw that there was definitely value to be had from the logs that could be obtained from these firewalls. In particular, we saw that Lancaster and in Princeton, when WannaCry was hitting it, we could see it in the logs. So we could see things, and that was a big value add. But one of the other main drivers of this is the whole IOMT or IoT conversation. The Internet of Medical Things is a unique ecosystem inside of healthcare. And for all those who are in healthcare, you're very familiar with it. The devices, if you can scan them and don't break them, number one, you probably aren't going to get much value out of the scanning of those devices. They generally are more generic in nature. The scanning may detect some open ports, but it's not going to tell you the device type. It's not going to tell you a lot of details about it. In addition to that, the IoT devices themselves don't have a lot of the capabilities you would find in, say, server systems. such as SIM integration and AV integration. Some of them may run AV, but it might be just the vendors provided AV, or they can't run AV. But even early on, we saw the value and the challenges related to IOMT through a temperature monitoring system that we found some pretty significant bugs in. Since it's been made public knowledge, we can talk about it, but a MegaView was a solution we had, and we found vulnerabilities that are now, they have CVEs associated to it. They've been publicly posted, and there's no fix. So we had to do something, and segmentation was the solution for that. And it, again, demonstrated the value of segmentation. But as we saw through the temperature monitoring solution, we had to segment based on an application level. And it's great for what we had to do there, but scalability, it doesn't scale very well when we have all these different IoT devices and applications. So we knew we had to do something more holistically. And then finally, audit findings drive a lot of what needs to be remediated. And in this case, it aligned with the others, the other points here. But the audit findings called out, we need a segmentation. And it would address some of the other concerns, such as SIM and antivirus and vendor management, all those things as well. So that's why Penn Medicine chose a segment. And it really helped to drive the initiative forward.
So this is our beginning. Like most others, it was a flat network, and anything and everything that could get plugged in and get onto the environment was essentially permitted. We had some challenges related to nurse residents who were, staying and had their own Linksys devices that they would plug in so they could connect their personal machines and, do streaming or file sharing. We don't miss those emails, but that was where we started from. That's where we had to essentially begin a lot of our work. So this is just a representation of what our environment looked like. Our production environment had its flat network across all entities, inclusive of our data center. The only thing that it was actually segmented off was the guest user traffic.
So segmentation, there were conversations about segmentation up 10 plus years ago. The first one was probably around PCI compliance. PCI compliance is a tough nut to crack. When this became an initiative for the organization, we took a look at what it would require to become PCI compliant and quickly realized that if we were going to keep all those systems and processes and storage inside our organization, it would become quite burdensome from an overhead perspective, a cost perspective. We would have to really start segmenting off that whole entire ecosystem of our environment. So we pretty much avoided it by outsourcing the whole entire thing. And we're able to push that segmentation challenge down the road a little bit more. But along came all the challenges of isolation firewalls, we'll call them. These are the firewalls that are put in for point security solutions. Now, one or two firewalls, not a big deal, but these things were reproducing like tribbles from Star Trek. They were showing up everywhere. And before we knew it, we had like 60, 70 different segmentation firewalls. Along with that comes the management overhead. If 70 firewalls, power supplies start dying, who's managing those? How quickly can we get them in? There's no redundancy on the small firewalls, especially power supplies or anything like that. So it became a management nightmare. In addition to that, as we looked at our organization and the other technologies that we have implemented, we could see that we were ready for this. This is the hype cycle curve. Gartner puts this out. It's something that a lot of organizations will use to see where they're at in relationship to technology overall. So we had web app firewalls and intrusion protection systems, and we're looking at DDoS protection and secure web gateways in place. SD-WAN was on the table. So we knew that it was the right time from an organizational perspective to tackle something like NAC, which was part of the segmentation project, and also the network firewalls, which are segmentation firewalls.
So how do we go about segmenting? That was one of the challenges, one of the questions that we had to ask ourselves, and kind of do a general overview. Are we doing the distributed? Are we doing centralized? Are we doing macro, micro? Do we do the physical firewalls? Do we do virtual firewalls at all locations? These were a lot of questions that were kind of out there that we didn't have all the answers to, And in order to do that, we needed to get some additional help. We needed to get an outside perspective. So what does that outsider perspective provide to us? You know, what does it bring in? So that kind of helps us define what our problem is, right? There's a lot of different ways that you can look at some of the challenges that you have along the way, but depending on the angle that you're looking at it from, you know, from networking perspective, you know, how can I make sure that this functions in this environment as quickly as possible? And you take the security perspective to say, well, how do we make this as secure as possible for, you know, that device or that system? And then once we're able to define what those problems are and the angles that we're looking at for resolving this, ultimately the group has to kind of head down the path of going towards a single direction of remediation. So we all had to be on the same page, understanding all the challenges that we have, everything that's encompassed, and then start heading down that road together. In doing some of that, there's the challenge of aligning all teams to that perspective. Some may not see the requirement of the security as pertinent. Others have different perspectives of how to achieve those security needs. But ultimately, you need to start having those challenging conversations across the teams. I will say that we had some very animated conversations amongst our teams. But they were all good conversations, and there are ones that needed to be had simply because it helped us understand everybody's perspective in the effort and what they were trying to accomplish and what their needs were that had to be met. So having an outsider or having a third party kind of help facilitate some of those conversations was great. Having that help also confirmed some of the assumptions that were there. There were some things that we had in the back of our minds to say, we need to watch out for this. We need to make sure we're working on that. There is a multitude of things that we already had at the forefront of our minds. And it was good to see from a third party that we were valid in those assumptions. It also helped to highlight some of the unknowns that we weren't aware of. It ended up, I'll say, facilitating some additional conversations with other departments, other groups, our platform engineering, just to help guide some of the potential decision-making that we had with the other team members from the infrastructure side to meet their needs and ensure that we weren't causing additional undue load on them as well.
So one of the critical conversations we had to have was about whether we do centralized or distributed segmentation. And this is really going to be a business decision based on a number of factors within your own organizations. But for us, we looked at the two different options, and we could see that there were some pros for centralized, being probably lower cap and OpEx dollars. You have 2 firewalls, centralized, everything flows through that. It's going to be relatively simple to implement from a hardware perspective, and the troubleshooting is going to be in one box. But if you want to do upgrades or one of those box fails, you're going to have some challenges, because if you have all entities of all the IoT traffic, everything is segmented flowing through one set of firewalls, they become critical, maybe too critical to all your eggs in one basket kind of scenario. So the distributed model, though, that distributes the fail points. It's scalable. So if a new site comes on board, we merge with somebody else, it's simple to put up another firewall, but there's going to be higher CapEx and OpEx costs. Also, the troubleshooting can get a little bit more trickier sometimes, depending on what's going on, because you might have to traverse through 1, 2, 3 different firewalls to see what's going on. And there's the management overhead of dealing with all these firewalls. So we did go distributed, and this is a very simple view of what we ended up with. At a high level, there was a set of firewalls for each entity. And an entity could be represented by a hospital, it could be represented by an administration type of environment, or the remote sites. So you can kind of envision that off to the left here, there's multiple hospital silos. Now within each of those silos, there's a further breakdown of zones. And each of those zones is reflected by the role of the device that's being deployed. So if it's a medical IoT, it goes in the medical IoT zone. If it's a trusted PC, it goes in a trusted zone. If it's a facility device, it goes in the facility zone. And a medical device in one hospital zone has to traverse a firewall and another firewall to get into the medical zone of another entity.
So we got our decision. We got this distributed platform that we were going to be going with. Now we needed to kind of take on that and start building out all of that work, which, you know, with this image here, we're kind of taking on the elephant share of work effort. We had to look at all different aspects, the wireless, wired, you know, how are we going to integrate that into our solution? Defining the zones that are going to be associated with that for the VRFs, for the VLANs that we're using. What does our solution look like for SD-WAN? What does it look like for the MAN? And then on top of that, at the end of the day, you know, once we build all of this out, this needs to be sustainable. It needs to be a long-term solution, but we require the process and the procedures to be able to maintain it, to be able to support it. So with that in mind, and with that theme of continuing to enable the business, we ended up with our first, I'll say, clause, which was our grandfather clause. We didn't want anything to break as we started to implement this and started implementing the zone procedures for it as we were doing the build out. So anything that was essentially listed or labeled as grandfathered up to a given point in time, we allowed it to exist in its environment that it was today, and there would be no change that was made to the device. Going beyond that actual set point, we started leveraging some of 802.1x, and there was different ways that we had to go through the zoning procedures and the profiling for these devices. We could do the machine account, you know, if it was joined to the domain, that made it a lot easier for our trusted devices that we owned, image, managed, and maintained. We had to do some of them based on the group membership to segment them off into their respective areas. And then others, we had to get a little bit unique and different because they weren't necessarily machines that could be joined to our domain, but they were explicit user accounts or service accounts. And we had to kind of look at and have a means of filtering on those to say if it was logged in with these credentials, it would be relegated to this given area. And this is just a little snippet of how we're going through with that process for enforcing. So you can see there at the top, the grandfathering option, where as long as it's marked with that grandfather feature, we're essentially telling it, you know, allow the actual access. Don't make any change to the actual device that was connected. Then you see in the next step there, leveraging our pushes that we did with the platform group. There were certain policies that were enabled, and we were looking at those policies for the wired endpoints to say, if this device meets this, it goes into our trusted segment. We also had to consider the fact that there might be devices that are getting plugged in that we're not being notified about or that haven't come through the appropriate channels and process. And we had to have our quarantine listed in here as well. So anything that doesn't meet the requirements of what we have previously defined will go into that quarantined area where it's kind of relegated to limited access for things. And then, of course, you know, dealing with some of the guest user environment, sometimes there's a need for devices that are either locked down and they just need internet access and they're coming from separate third parties. So we'll place them here, or things that are patient satisfaction, you know, kiosks that you may have in lobby areas for use by patients or others that are waiting for them. So we had to have the guest segment as well. So I'll let you take a look at this real briefly, but this is just some general descriptions associated with some of the zones that we highlighted or outlined, and what criteria we were reviewing them by when these submissions came in, and continue to do so, so that we could place them according to what they fell into. So with this, now we got to start talking about the process. That's a lot to deploy, to define, to say these are all the parameters that we're going to work by. But who owns this? You know, is this just networking? Is this just a security requirement? So security engineering can just utilize this. And it's a little bit more than that, especially, you know, considering the implications, potential impact to the organization as a whole. So we actually had to get a team put together of the various groups, and that was our NAC onboarding team that we constructed. It's got folks from our information assurance group, it's got folks from networking, it's got folks from the security engineering team, and we had to start building out a lot of the process that was going to help support this long term. So starting with our vendor intake process, we built out a templated ticket system. So essentially something gets created. Those three groups are involved when that ticket gets launched. We had to build a guide for that process so that our IS and IT teams, specifically PMO, because they usually get these systems first, so that they could follow what that procedure looks like. And with that, we're constantly working on that process and refining it and trying to make it better. So we're actually meeting on a daily basis to review everything that we are putting out there, everything that's coming in. If we see any challenges, if there's any issues that are coming up, if there's any way that we have to modify the procedure that we're advertising so that it's more user-friendly for our user community, that's what we're doing. And with this, there are some successes. The PMO adoption was great, once we got into the right area with them, I'll say. So having them embrace it, because that's something that they want to see. Project management wants something that they can follow and just simply complete. And the other benefit that we have with this is the bulk profiling. If you take one unique device that actually has the appropriate level of intelligence that we can get a unique fingerprint out of, we only have to profile that device once. It comes in, we look at it, we get the unique fingerprint. We can replicate that across to the other services, across to the other entities, so that anytime it gets plugged in, there's no question about that device. It comes up and it goes where it's supposed to. Some of the challenges we had along the way was the vendor adoption. That was the theme, I'll say, from the beginning, and it continues to be a little bit of a challenge, but they're starting to understand a lot more as we're talking with them and helping them understand some of the reason and some of the risk associated with the implementation. They are adopting the process a lot more now. And there were some, lessons learned with that, getting the communication with them, making sure that we had the right people at the table for those conversations. So we had our design, we deployed it, we're constantly reviewing and refining it, and we're kind of just repeating that process. So this is just something that's organically grown and it's just ongoing. And this is just a sample of what our ticketing system looks like. So once that ticket gets created, it generates 3 different activities for our groups. So the information assurance takes a look at it, takes a look into their repository to see, do we already have this device assessment done for this? If yes, they can close out their end. If not, that person needs to initiate that assessment. They can't actually close that out until they initiated the process, so that we know we have them on file and pending. And then some of the more critical components to it. So, we really don't want to hold up based on process, of them doing the intake piece. So the security engineering and networking engineering group have their own tickets that they collaborate on. So we have a list, that previous list that you saw in terms of how we're zoning these systems. It's fairly straightforward. However, if there are any challenging areas or considerations, that's where we have that conversation between the 2 groups. So the zone assignment is a conversation between the assigned engineers. And then ultimately, once it's decided, the firewall rules can be created, and the assignment, if it's requiring reservation, can happen, or the actual range can be supplied for that. And this is, again, just some of the information that we shared earlier. These are some of the device types that are going into these respective zones. The one thing I did want to call out, this is actually fairly fresh and new for us, is we did start off this initiative with a deprecated zone. For systems, you say we can't run our application on anything other than XP or Windows 7. Ultimately, as a healthcare organization, we came to the realization that over time, it's going to be unmanageable to constantly cycle these devices in and out. Some of them are static in nature, go through firmware updates to get their programming, and to try and either flip them back and forth between their IOMT or their deprecated zone, if they were in or out of support, would have been too cumbersome, and that would have been a team in and of itself to be able to constantly keep up with. So we have effectively gotten rid of our deprecated zone. We are sunsetting that, and we are going to be placing everything into their respective areas, regardless of their level of support.
So at this point, we've got processes, we've got the way we're going to do it. We know what we're going to do, and this comes down to the how, especially with the firewall level. This is where we started. We have firewalls everywhere, so we need to figure out how we're going to manage these firewalls. And this is where the rubber meets the road, so to speak, from the security point of view anyway. So we know it's going to be 30 firewalls or so. It's going to be complex. Then we want to protect the high-risk devices, which are those in the zone. We know that might be some internet access. There's some common applications, and we don't want to overwhelm the business. We want to enable the business. So with all that said, the first thing we made sure we have in place is the firewall standards, and it's a firewall review process. This is a template we use. It's used by a security team. It does a peer review process with other security team members. And it validates that we have the naming conventions. It validates that we have the right objects in being called out and the group names, and also just a peer check on the rules. And this has caused some issues. Human error happens. You can't prevent that, and this helps with that. In addition, we have considered some firewall management suites. We just haven't found the right one yet. So as far as common apps go, we know that there's going to be a subset of applications, whether it's Active Directory or SCCM, antivirus, those kind of things that are going to apply for all zones. So we created a global rule that goes across all the firewalls using our central firewall management solution to distribute that rule. In addition, we know the internet may be needed, but we're going to treat all internet coming from these protected zones as if it was a business critical or a business needed internet requirement. And in that case, it's simply just going to go in our business allow list. Generally speaking, no one should be surfing the internet in an open way, but if it's a allowed business requirement, say they need to go to acme.com to get patches or something, that's a low risk site, so it should be open to pretty much anybody on our internal network. This also simplified the whole entire question and for the zones. To do this, we did a negate rule inside of our firewall where we allow the internet, but we blocked it to everything internal, and then we let the internet firewall handle all that traffic. So when it comes to what can be passing through the firewalls, we had a choice to make whether we're going to do it by IP to IP or any to IP. Because a lot of these devices are DHCP, and there's a lot of static IP complications, we made a decision to simply say, if it's good enough for one device in the zone, it's good enough for all devices in the zone. So all devices can get to a pump server, for example, or whatever server it is. Now, we did specify rules based on the function of those devices. So those devices are expected to flow through the right rule, and we can see what's going on there based on the application. But it's a any to specific function. In addition to that, we had to make a decision whether we're going to do IP or port-based rules. At this point in time, we're doing IP-based rules because we know from experience that port-based rules are challenging, not just because we don't get good documentation, but oftentimes what is documented isn't the reality. So we know that from other experiences, especially with VPN setups. We decided to go with IP at this point, but we can monitor the traffic. And in the future, our goal is to get to port-based. Finally, when we put the firewalls in, we put them in any, because we didn't exactly trust that we knew what was going to be flowing through those firewalls. We let them sit in any for a while, and we monitored the traffic, and then we built rules that matched the traffic we saw. And that way we were able to basically get everything out of the any rule and put it into its appropriate rule where it belonged, and then turn off the any rule. And at this point in the game, we are at the process of turning off those any rules, and it should be done with those any rules by end of this month. So this is a general overview of the time frame. 2017 WannaCry hit. It took about 2 years before we were ready to really tackle this from a strategic point of view with budget dollars and everything else in play. And then things started to move a little bit more quickly, but still, even from then, when we started deploying NAC and firewalls in 19, it took about a year and a few months to get everything actually built. And to the point now where we have the firewalls deployed and the any rules are out of there with the deny rule at the bottom. So back to the hype curve. Originally we were all excited, and then we hit that trough of disillusionment where we realized what this was actually going to mean and the work that was involved in getting us there. But we're coming out of that now. We can see the light at the end of the tunnel. We can see the benefits coming out of this. But segmentation is a long process. We are not done yet. We know there's still medical device IoT security solutions that we should be laying on top of this. Wireless NAC is something we have to tackle yet. We want to do the port level as mentioned, and then look at microsegmentation with NSX in the data center. Once we get that point, there's automation and user-based, so we can track identities of who's accessing these applications and maybe leverage our firewalls to do user-based rules. And once we have that, we have end user behavior analytics that we layer on top of it. So this is a continuing process, but the foundation is laid.
So in doing this, a lot of the opportunities that we had where we learned was getting the right things in place and having the appropriate support. All right. So ultimately, at the end of the day, getting the support from our leadership was key. It was crucial because as you're going through this effort, as careful as all of our planning may be, you know, even if we did 95% absolutely right, they have to understand that that 5% is there. There will be its challenges. They will pop up. But as long as they understand that and they're able to work with us and the community as a whole for resolving some of those items as they come up, it makes the process a lot easier to work through. And we did have some other challenges along the way. So one of them here, you know, our MDM conflict, essentially the frequency in which our check for devices through Intune was so high that it was actually delayed in receiving its response back. And essentially our system didn't see the response in a timely fashion. So those devices started to, I'll say drop, but they weren't getting authorized, even though they may have been approved at a later point. So that was one issue. Another one was our aging out of the devices. So as we talked about enabling the business, we had those that were essentially grandfathered that, you know, no action was going to be taken. We found out in our NAC profiling engine that it was actually dumping those and aging them out of the system after a given period of time. I believe it was like a 90-day time frame. So that became a challenge that we had to kind of dig through and figure out what was going on and remediate. We also had some things with platform engineering and imaging. Usually they're fairly good about having a specific area where they image all of the devices. But in some instances, they have a brand new PC that they need to get out on the floor and, you know, rather than waste the time of, you know, going to their build area and imaging the device, they would go to the floor to do it. But in doing that, the device is unknown. It doesn't have our image. It doesn't have the checks and balances on there. So it would go into our quarantine space. So we had to figure out how to get them some functionality there so they're able to image securely. And then once they're done with that, it actually goes into the appropriate segment. And something I hinted at before, the PMO adoption, we believed that we had the communication out there and we were going through all the appropriate channels, but we weren't seeing as much information or requests coming in. So we had to go through a lot more. And we're still continuing to go through more in terms of getting communication out there. We've had some lunch and learns with them. We started off with a subset, I think of, you know, 2 or 3, but then realized that we needed to expand it further beyond the PMO group and also to others so that they were able to understand what our process was. And then wireless. Although it's a lot easier, more user-friendly, I should say, we are finding that it's a lot harder to do some of the segmentation for these things. It's very unique in terms of these devices, what they're capable of doing. Can they do username and password authentication for, you know, being WPA2 enterprise? And going through those challenges, we just noticed that wireless is a lot more to swallow, and we're still working on it.
So in case you missed the ongoing theme here, the elephant is a pretty good representation of a picture of what segmentation has been. Whether it's the elephant in the room being that we had to tackle segmentation because we had a flat network, or whether it's the different perspectives of that elephant and what it means and how we need to deal with it, or whether it's taking and eating an elephant one bite at a time, which in this case, this slide is what we're talking about. The elephant represents this challenge. But as Tom mentioned before, the first bite of that elephant was the management support. And we got that, and that helped make everything else possible. Once we had that particular aspect tackled, everything else kind of fell in place. You know, we had our designs, we had our firewalls, our NAC, the dollars, process procedures, all that just naturally flowed. And at the end of the result is that the business has been enabled to be more successful through a segmentation project. So we didn't break that much. We've learned from it, and we're now in a better, more secure place with the segmentation zones established. In addition to that, networking and security have been able to establish a good relationship working together through this. It's been great to see. You know, working with Tom and his team, it's it's a better organization when both your networking and security teams can be working together for a common goal. In addition, we've segmented, we've established that. We have the processes for onboarding. We have now firewalls with rules in place. We have monitoring points so we can see all that traffic flowing across. And all that traffic is centrally logged so we can go to one place for troubleshooting and for incident security events. So
that's the end of our elephant show.
And at this point, I'll turn off my screen sharing and turn it back over for any questions.
Well, thank you so much, Seth and Tom. That was really great. I learned a lot. I think one of the things that most impressed me, honestly, was your organized thought processes, if I may say. You know, so often projects like this end up being a little bit reactive, like people running around shouting. And you guys really, I love the way that you went through the process step by step. What was the hardest thing that you had to do?
I'll go first and let Tom weigh in second. I think the hardest thing was waiting. I'm myself, let's tackle the problem, kind of like you're saying. It's a problem. There's a fire burning. We need to put it out. And if you recall, there was a 2-year time frame between WannaCry and when we actually started just having those design meetings. So waiting for that it can be difficult, but it's a requirement. Like you said, it paid off, and the way that leadership drove this and requiring us to have those conversations and have those design meetings, because now I can't tell you how many cliches are out there about that, but you measure once, you cut once. If you're gonna, measure multiple times, you cut once. But if you don't measure and you just shoot, you're gonna miss.
Yeah, perfectly said. Tom, do you want to add anything to that?
No, I think that's perfect. That was really the majority of the challenges. We would go through these efforts. We would get some initial responses and feedback, and we would, go through again, get everything ironed out, and say, okay, we think here's where we need to be. And it just took time for those conversations to happen, upstairs, so to speak, and for good reason, because everybody understands that we want to do this, we want to do it right. We don't want to just go at it, and try and approach it too quickly without giving some very long thought to it to make sure we're on the appropriate pathway.
Right, and it's clear you did that, which is great. We just have a moment left. Final advice for our audience, because I am so pro network segmentation. I think it's what everyone needs to be doing. We did, by the way, we did a survey. We've surveyed our readership twice in the last 2 years, an annual survey on every topic, kitchen sink. But one question we asked was, have you done network segmentation? I don't know whether I should have been surprised or not, but we only had about 25% of organizations have done any network segmentation. That's so low, my gosh, Any advice for those who might follow in your footsteps?
Go. You want to go, Tom? Go for it.
Yeah, I'll go first. At least from my perspective, proactive collaboration amongst the teams, just because we want to make sure that everybody's in alignment, everyone's on the same page, has a clear understanding of what is guiding the other teams and their requirements and some of their decision points or talking points. Getting through a lot of that helps to paint the picture a lot clearer. I think having everything too separated in terms of siloed communications tends to cause some challenges and some problems that aren't seen. But once you get all the appropriate groups together to talk those things out, it makes it a lot easier, and it makes it a better across the aisle conversation, and makes it, obviously it made us a stronger organization as a result of that. So I think that's one of the key things I would say.
Great. And Seth, any thought?
Yeah, jumping on top of that, saying kind of the same thing. The groups can represent different areas, such as audit. They have a lot of influence in the organization, and the business listens to audit differently than may listen to just simply technical folks. Yeah. So having those drivers and finding the value in operations teams, saying your systems wouldn't go down if we had segmentation where we could isolate them in a secure bubble. So like Tom was saying, the more people with the same message speaking up, it makes it a business decision, not just a security, I'm ringing my rattle again.
Exactly. Great advice. Thank you both so much. This has been extremely illuminating. As I said, we have the beef and you've given us the beef. So thank you, gentlemen, for an excellent, excellent presentation. And Matt Rayner has magically reappeared to conclude our session.
Thank you, Mark, and thank you, Seth and Thomas, for echo what Mark just said. A great opening presentation for the program. We're now going to take a very short break, the shortest break possible of only 15 minutes, and resume back here at 10:30 Eastern Time with a panel discussion on the new reality of securing healthcare. So we look forward to seeing you all back here very shortly. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Thanks.